Hey everybody, that Auto Prof here. Today we're going to do some preventative maintenance on a client's vehicle. This customer has brought in their 2008 LR2 for preventative maintenance service. We checked by the mileage, discovered that at this mileage the only thing that's due is an oil filter change, but we're never actually just going to do an oil filter change on a client's vehicle. So we're going to give this thing a full inspection, make sure all the systems are in good shape. If there's any faults, we're going to let the client know. When the client dropped it off, they made an extra note. There's a humming noise coming from the rear. So we'll keep an eye out for anything that might be causing that while we're doing our inspection. First thing we got to do, road test. Just take it out, make sure there's no abnormal pulls, brakes are working fine, drivability issues are not present, and let's see if we can hear that unusual noise or any other ones. So let's do that, and I'll see you in a little bit. So the first thing I notice when I get in and start this thing, turn the ignition on, we see the customer is within 100 kilometers due for service. And 7 days overdue. So that's pretty good. That's what we're looking for with our clients. We don't want super duper over, but we don't want to waste their money by changing it too early either. So this customer brought it in just at the right time. We're back from our road test. Before we forget, let's plug the tool into the data link connector under the dash to reset this service indicator. We're going to plug it in and wait for the beep. Unplug it, and let's cycle the ignition and make sure we don't get that distance to service warning when it comes on again. Perfect. So we're back from our road test. When we brought it into the shop, we checked the lights, we checked the horn, we checked the wipers, we had an assistant check the lights in the back. And all the lights are working on it, so that's great. This shop uses digital inspection. So we can go in here, check off all those items as okay. If we find an issue, we can take a picture. If there's photographic evidence, it's great. Clients really appreciate that. Most electronic inspections can be sent to the client via email or text, so they can have their own record of everything while it's here. First thing now that we got it in is we want to take pictures of the condition of it as it is when it arrives. Just in case there's an issue down the road and there's discrepancy where potentially something was caused here or wasn't caused here, let's take some pictures of how it looked while it was up. So, overall the car's in good shape. There's no dents or anything to make note of. So, let's move on with the rest of our inspection. The next part of our service is to lubricate the door hinges. And while we're at it, we're going to check all the seat belts in the car too. It's really important to keep those hinges lubricated to prevent wear, and we don't end up with doors that are flopping or hard to open. Be really cautious when lubricating door latches, because some of them contain micro switches for the door jar switch, and that micro switch can be affected by lubrication. So let's go ahead, lubricate these hinges, and check all these seat belts. Alright, so for checking the belts, we're going to pull it out, make sure there's no damage on the belt. We're going to check the ratcheting mechanism, and then we're going to make sure it gets retained securely in the buckle. Looks good. Now let's repeat for the rest. So the next step of our inspection is the underhood checks. So we're going to have a look around, we're going to check the fluids, we're going to check the air filter, we're going to check the belt or belts, depending on the style and how many we have. And we're just going to have a look around at the general condition of the engine bay. We're going to look for leaks, we're going to look for any kind of rodent intrusion, anything like that. Let's get started. Remove the engine cover, put it somewhere safe. Don't forget to put it back on later. Let's have a light, have a look around. Everything looks good under the cover. I don't see any signs of obvious leakage at the top of the engine. So let's move on. First thing we'll check is the engine oil. Pull the dipstick out, wipe it off, put it back down, and check the oil out. That looks pretty good. Not too dark, and right in between the min and the max. This is perfect. Really happy with that. Next step would be the transmission fluid. What we're finding now is that a lot of vehicles don't give you the option, like a dipstick or some other method of checking the transmission fluid easily. So there's going to be a procedure involved in doing it, probably with an access plug underneath. So for now, when I drove it, I didn't notice any shifting problems. Customer has no complaints of it. If I don't see any leaks externally, I'm probably just going to recommend a flush at the manufacturer's recommended mileage. Moving on from that, coolant. Coolant reservoir is located over here on this vehicle. Be super careful taking this cap off. When the system's hot, it's under pressure, and we do not want it to spray all over the place. I'm either going to use a refractometer, or in this case, a hydrometer. I'm going to take a sample of the coolant, allow it to fill this, and there's a float in here. And this float is going to lift up and indicate to me the freezing point of my coolant in my mixture. In this case, this is great. In this climate, Canada, we definitely want cold protection on our coolant. Minus 30, minus 35, awesome. This stuff's great condition. Let's get our light, check the level. Perfect. Right at max with the engine hot. Put the lid back on. This car has hydraulic power steering. The reservoir is right here. Most power steering systems don't have a flush interval, but it's generally not a good idea to let it run for a couple 100,000 kilometers. If it's looking pretty gross, probably a good idea to recommend a change. In this case, the fluid's clean. It's right under the max line. Good. I'm not going to recommend it for this car. We'll keep an eye on it next few services and see what we think. Brake fluid's going to be our next one. Before we take this cover off, one of the other things what we want to do when we're under here is remove any kind of debris from the wiper cowl area, because there's drains in here for water. If they're plugged, that water sits, and it may cause issues down the road, or in the winter it could freeze and lock the wipers down. So let's remove all this debris we found. Hey little fella, how's it going? So we're going to remove this cover. Let's put it with the other one. Brake fluid reservoir is located right here. I'm going to use a light, because most of the times we can look right through it and see the level. I want to avoid removing the cap, if possible, because brake fluid is hygroscopic. When it's exposed to air, it starts to absorb moisture. Now realistically, how much moisture is going to get absorbed during the 10 seconds I take the cap off? Probably not much, but why add it anyways? I can see the level and I can check the color. It's okay. However, if I'm suspicious, I can test the brake fluid. If I don't have a service history on this, and I know it hasn't been exchanged in about 2 years, because 2-3 years is the max I want to leave brake fluid in, what I can do is open that system up and use a tester to monitor how much moisture content is in that brake fluid. Let's do that now. I'm going to put the 2 probes down inside the fluid, and I'm going to hit the button. The button reads the amount of moisture that's in it. This is reading less than 1% moisture. Perfect. Be really careful you don't drip brake fluid on the paint. Put the lid back on, nice and tight. While I'm in this area, air filter's right here. Gone ahead and loosened the screws already. Let's have a look at this filter. It's the right one, which is good, because sometimes you get the wrong one and it's not filling the whole box, so that's not great. What I'm going to do, I don't see any large amounts of dirt on here. I'm going to hold this up to a light and look through it. If I can see the light through the filter, it's just good to go. This one's not too bad. Probably going to recommend we change that the next time the car's here. Do those screws back up later. Don't let me forget. Next thing, battery's right here. Some shops will check the battery. on every service. Some shops do it on more of a seasonal inspection. It's really up to you. Your customer is going to appreciate the value if you check it every time. So we've got the battery tester hooked up. We're going to go in, select battery test, tell it it's in the car, physical check is good. Top post, regular type, and 730 cold cranking. That's exactly what it says on the battery. Let's see how it does. That's a good battery. Let's take a picture of that and attach it to the report for the client. Perfect. Check off, the battery is good. All right, so we're done with that. Let's put this away. The last fluid we have to look in here is the washer fluid. So there's a filter in here. Let's make sure that stays in there. And let's top it up with the appropriate fluid. Here in Canada, generally a good idea to go with the -40 stuff. If you top up a fluid and you do spill some, it happens. But clean it up. Don't leave a mess under here. All right, the last check I'm going to make under here is the serpentine belt. Now, the vast majority of cars you work on, the serpentine belt is going to be on the front of the engine. On a transverse mounted engine like this, it'll be located over here. However, this manufacturer put the serpentine belt on the rear of the engine in order to fit an inline 6 transversely mounted engine bay. So the serpentine belt is actually located back here. Let's have a look. Uh-oh. Got some pretty good cracking on that belt. Now, belts do last a long time, but they don't last forever. This car's got 246,000 kilometers on it. Probably not the original belt, but it's definitely due to be replaced. Given the mileage, I think it's probably a good idea to look at those idler pulleys and tensioner pulleys, possibly replace them too while we have it apart. Let's get a picture for the client. Perfect. Last thing we got to do under here is get the oil filter. On this car, the oil filter is changed from the top of the engine, but a lot of the cars we work on are changed from underneath. For now, there's a plastic housing in here. We're going to undo it and lift the filter up. Put a rag down to catch any mess that drips out. If we do miss some, we can clean it up from underneath later. Sometimes they're a little snug. So here we are. Here's the plastic housing with the cartridge filter in it. This filter element gets replaced along with this O-ring. Never reuse the O-ring. So we've completed all of our under hood checks. We've got the oil filter in, new filter, new O-ring, torqued the housing to 25 Newton meters, reinstalled the screws on our air filter housing. Let's get it up in the air and do the next part of our inspection. Wheels are off the ground, give it a bounce. Make sure it's solid. Aces. So now we've got it up in the air, let's check the suspension. We've got a McPherson strut suspension in this vehicle. We've got a strut with a spring on it that bolts to the knuckle, and on the other side of the knuckle, a ball joint that goes to the lower control arm. We've got tie rods that control the steering and move the wheel back and forth side to side. So what we're going to do is a shake test. We're going to grab the wheel, and we're going to just give it just a little bit of a shake. We're not trying to turn the whole wheel here, we're just feeling for any kind of free play. Side to side, if there's any looseness, we'll feel that in the steering. Top and bottom, we're checking the wheel bearing. I'm going to check the ball joint. Let's grab the wheel just forward of the bottom of it and push it in and out. That feels good. The bearing felt good. Might be something here. We'll have a closer look when we get underneath it, but let's keep that in mind. Let's go around and check all the rest of them too. So we've checked all the suspensions. Everything's in good shape except for that one loose steering component we felt on this wheel. Let's have a look at the rest of the assembly here. Let's check the tire out, look at the wheel for any kind of damage. Let's have a quick look at the brake pads too. Look for any kind of bulging or cracking in the sidewall. Looks good. No cracking in the treads. Tread is wearing evenly across, no feathering, no wear on one side compared to the other. So that's really good. We're going to use the depth gauge to measure the tire. When we put it into the tire tread, it's going to push this in and give us a reading. So we've got about 7.3 millimeters of tread. That's great. These are obviously pretty new tires, so really happy with that. Last thing we've got to do with the tire is set the pressure. Check the pressure every time the client brings the vehicle in for service. We're going to set the pressures to the amount that's labeled on the B-pillar placard. So when you open the door, there's a tire pressure sticker in there. Never ever use the tire pressure that's printed on the side of the tire. That is the maximum pressure the tire can handle. It's not the tire pressure that's supposed to be in there on this vehicle. Go with what the engineers decided to put in this vehicle. In this case, it's 35 psi. Perfect. All right. Tires are good. Let's take a quick look at those brake pads. Get my light out. I'm only going to measure the inboard one because it's not here for a brake inspection. There's no brake complaints. The brake felt good when I drove it. So I'm going to measure the outboard one. I'm going to have a look at the general condition. And when I get the vehicle up, I'll be able to see the inboard one from the back. If I see anything that looks like it needs addressing, I'll make that recommendation. But for now, we're not doing a whole brake inspection on the vehicle. I'm going to start with my 10 mil pad, or 10 mil gauge, because these look like they got a lot on them. Yeah, it's a lot. It's just over 10. So we'll make that note on the inspection and write the tread depth down too. Then we'll go around and check all the rest of them. Here we are. We checked our suspension, we checked our brakes, we set all of our tire pressures, look at all the tires, everything was good. So we've got the car up in the air, I've removed the skid plate, and we're ready to start changing the oil. While we're under here and we've got the oil draining out, we're going to have a look around. We have a couple things we know we have to look for. One, we know that there was some play in the left front wheel when we did the shake test on the steering. So let's see if we can find the source of that. The customer said there's a Allen noise in the back, and I heard it when I was driving. So I've confirmed the complaint, and I'm going to see if I can find anything obvious. I'm not going to diagnose it on part of the service, because that's really not part of a preventative maintenance service. But if I can get an idea of where it's coming from, then we can give the client an idea of maybe how much the diagnosis is going to actually take. So let's get the oil draining, and then we'll have a look around. I'm going to put a 17 mil wrench, or whatever, you're going to use whatever size wrench you need, on the drain plug. I'm going to crack it loose. Turn it out. Make sure the drain pan is in the right spot, and let the oil flow. Now, remember the very first thing I did was take it for a road test. Well, when I did that, I made sure all the engine oil was nice and hot, because I want it hot and warm, because the viscosity changes when it gets hot. If the engine oil, or if the engine is really cold, the oil is going to be really thick. It's not going to drain out of that filter housing up top, and it's not going to drain very well out of here. So taking it for a road test allows us to get the engine oil up to temperature, and we can have a look and see if there's any concerns we need to be looking at in terms of braking, steering, whatever. So we've got the oil draining. Let's let that go for a few minutes to make sure we get all of it, and we'll have a look around under the car. I'm looking at the CV boots. I'm looking at brake hoses. I'm looking at the insides of the brakes, insides of the tires. Let me give this a bit of a wiggle, see if I can see what the problem is. Oh, I can. We've got a loose outer tie rod on the left side. So we'll have to make a note of that on our inspection and make sure it gets priced out to the client. Make sure all the brake lines are not rotted out. That tends to happen in this climate. Look for any leaks, whatever fluids, transmission, engine oil, coolant, power steering. Look really good here. Chassis is in good shape, not rotted out. Definitely another thing we have to watch in this climate. Harnesses are good. Exhaust is intact. No black soot marks to suggest an exhaust leak at any of the joints. And we didn't hear any exhaust noise when we drove it in. Moving back, rear suspension's in good shape. CV axles, CV boots are not torn. Oh, we got something back here. Exhaust is in good shape back here. The trailer hitch is in good shape. Overall, not too bad. Let's have a look at what I found. So we're back here under the rear of the vehicle, and we have the rear diff here. This is the axle shaft that goes out to the driver's side, and this is the axle shaft that goes out to the passenger side. Well, if we look at the two axle shafts, this one's nice and dry, and this one is covered in oily dirt. This seal that keeps the fluid in the diff when the axle comes out has failed on this side. Well, the client's complaining about a noise in the back, like a hum. Well, this seal has allowed fluid to escape the differential, and that fluid, while there's still some in there, there's not enough, and it's probably damaged the bearings inside the diff. So at this point, we're going to make a note on our inspection of what we found. We're definitely going to take a picture, we'll send it up to the service advisor, and it'll be their responsibility to inform the client and sell some further diagnosis as to what's happening here. All right, so the oil's pretty much finished draining out of this. We just got a tiny little dribble coming out. So I've got the original drain plug. I've put a new drain plug gasket on it. I'm going to give this a wipe to make sure that there's no dirt left, and I'm going to start threading the drain plug in. Tighten it by hand. And then I'm going to use a torque wrench to make sure it's proper tightness. I looked it up ahead of time. It should be 35 Newton meters. Tighten it down. Perfect. There it is. One final note I want to make. A lot of vehicles, although not much anymore, but older vehicles in particular, had grease fittings on a lot of suspension components. So we'd use a tool like this, which is a grease gun. The grease gun fits over the end of a Zerk fitting in the ball joint or tie rod or whatever we were doing. Snaps on, and then you pump the handle, and it ejects grease into the joint. Very, very important that we wipe any dirt off of that Zerk fitting before we start greasing it. Because if we don't, there's a ton of pressure coming out of this grease gun, and it's going to force that dirt into the joint, and it's going to cause premature failure. If this has a Zerk fitting and we were going to grease it, if it has a sealed boot, we're just going to put enough grease in to just kind of see the boot puff up a bit. If it has an unsealed boot, we're going to pump grease in until we see all the old grease has been displaced and new grease is coming out of the unsealed boot. All right, we're back on the ground. We're almost done. So, what have we done so far? We did a whole inspection of everything around the car, in the engine bay, and we checked the suspension, the tires. We found potentially the source of that noise complaint in the back, and we noticed the tire rod that was loose too. We took pictures of everything, we filled out the inspection, we sent it off to the service advisor. Service advisor has that information now. It's their responsibility to create an estimate, get a hold of the client, and see, are we going to fix it today? Are we not going to fix it today? Maybe bring it back later. So there's nothing too immediately safety problem on this. Some of it can wait, but it's up to the client. Let's let them make that decision. So give them all the information, let them make an informed decision, right? So the next step we're going to do, while we're waiting for that, for the client service advisor to get back to us, let's put some oil in it. Pretty important. We're going to take the cap off. Sometimes the cap will tell you what type of oil goes in, but not always. In this case, no. So I've got my service information open over there. I know it takes 5W30. I'm going to install synthetic oil. We don't typically, at this shop, install mineral oil anymore, and a lot of shops are getting away from it. I'm going to put a funnel in. I'm going to make sure my funnel is totally clean. I don't want any dirt or dust or anything that might be in the funnel getting down inside the engine. I'm going to put it in here, and then I'm going to start adding oil. Now this thing takes more oil than my bucket holds, so I'm going to have to go get some more. I'll be back in a minute. Make sure I don't get any drips everywhere. So I'm going to remove my funnel, make sure it's not dripping all over the place, put it down in my oil bucket so I make a mess on my shop floor. Make sure there's no dirt on the seal in here. Reinstall the cap. You don't want to have any potential for dirt or anything to fall down inside of there. So we've got the oil in, but that filter cavity is empty. The passageways have a lot of the oil drained out. So we've got to start the engine. It's going to rebuild oil pressure, it's going to fill the filter cup, it's going to fill all the passageways, and then we're going to turn the engine off, and then we have to let it sit, and we have to wait for everything to drain back down. So some manufacturers say this takes about a minute, some manufacturers like this one say it takes about 10. After about 10 minutes, we're going to pull the dipstick, and we're going to check the level line. This car's nice, it has a dipstick. Some cars have a digital dipstick, and you would normally check it either with a scan tool or through the dash. But on this one, we're lucky we got a dipstick. So we're going to go start it, and then we're going to wait for it to drain. Now we play the waiting game. It's time. So, just going to check the dipstick. Pull the dipstick out. We're going to wipe it off. Make sure it's clean. Put it in and look at it. Mint. Super clean oil, which is brand new. And it's right around the 75% mark. So that's great. 50 to 75% is what I'm shooting for. I don't really want it to get over 100. Because over 100, too much oil is almost as bad as not enough. So right at that 75% mark, perfect. Put the dipstick back in, make sure it's seated all the way. Don't forget the engine cover. Sorry, buddy. You're going to have to find somewhere else. Nice working with it. So, I'm going to do one last check. Make sure I got all the lids on. Nice and tight. Dipstick's in. Make sure I tighten those bolts back down. Everything I've touched is back to the way it was when I came in. Perfect. That's how it should be. We're going to close the hood. Make sure there are no handprints, oil marks, anything. This is somebody else's very large investment. We should make sure it leaves here as good or if not better than when it arrived. So there we are. We've completed the PM service. We found some problems. The service advisor has the inspection. They're talking to the client. We haven't heard anything back yet. So for now, we're going to take the car out and we'll either bring it back in later to do the work or maybe the client will bring it back another day. Either way, the service is done. So I'd like to take a minute. I'd like to thank Jake and everybody else at the Linwood Garage for letting me do this service here to show you guys. So thanks very much and we'll see you in class.